Dale. So I'll remember your name. I'll never forget because of that. So grateful that you're here, and I hope that you can hear okay, although I'm not going to ask if you can. I was speaking at a big convention in Little Rock several years ago, and I got up to speak, and I noticed that the people in the back of the room were doing like this. And so I asked one of the dumbest questions I've ever asked in all my life. I said, "Can you folks in the back hear okay?" And some guy screamed back and says, "No, sir, and we sure appreciate it too." So I will assume you hear if you want to, and if you can't, you just didn't really care. Delighted to be back in Clark County. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's very informal. I'm going to spend most of my time just letting you ask questions or making a comment, kind of just a simple town hall as you eat. And one of the reasons that I enjoy going around the tables, I got to look at pretty much everything on the menu. Everybody has a wide variety. It looks terrific. And we want to just express our thanks to Greers Family Restaurant for letting us barge in on it tonight. So I hope you're enjoying the food. I always like to remind you, take good care of your servers. Sometimes you go to a meeting like this and we forget them. They're the hardest working people in America, and we often don't appreciate the people who take care of us in restaurants, and make sure you take good care of them tonight. I want to reiterate one thing Janet mentioned is about the last couple of mornings being up early. We're up early a lot of mornings, but we got up this morning in Miami, so it was really early. So our bodies woke up at what was 2:30 in the morning Central Time. And so I'm not worried about you going to sleep on me. I'm very concerned I might go to sleep on you. That's possible. If I do, nudge me a little bit and I'll pick up right where I left off, I'm pretty sure. Folks, there's so many people running this time in the Republican primary. There are a lot of folks, good people. You're not going to hear me say bad things about the other people running. One of the reasons is because, yes, I want to be quarterback of the team, so do they. But I don't want to be the quarterback because I broke the legs of all the other people trying out. I want to be the quarterback of the team by playing a better game and convincing people that I would be the best person to take our team to the Super Bowl and win. It's not enough to run a good campaign. We need to win. And then when we win, we need to be able to govern effectively. Because if all we can do is have a political campaign that we win, and then we don't know how to lead and get this country back on track economically and militarily, then what's the point? There isn't one. I'm going to put it to you like this. If you were to get on an airplane, and the weather was terrible, thunderstorms booming all around, and you knew you were about to fly through some really nasty weather, and you looked up there in the cockpit, and there's a guy with some gray hair who turns around and says, "Folks, don't worry, I've got 20,000 hours in the cockpit, and I've flown through hundreds of storms, a lot worse than this one." Chances are you'd feel a little better about the flight. If you get in the plane and you look up in the left seat, and the guy in the cockpit's young enough to be your grandson, and he turns around and he says, "Boy, I'm really all amped up about this because this is my first time to fly one of these." You're probably not all that confident. This is no time in America for us to bring somebody to the cockpit who hasn't flown through some storms. One of the reasons that I'm running this time is because I understand what it's like not only to lead, to sit in the left seat. I think being a governor is the best preparation for being a president, because you've actually managed a microcosm of the federal government. And perhaps having governed in Arkansas during the period in which I did uniquely prepares me, both for the campaign as well as to lead this country. For one thing, most of us would probably assume that it's likely that Hillary Clinton will be the Democratic nominee. And there's only one candidate on the Republican side who has consistently fought the Clinton political machine in elections and won and lived to tell about it. That would be me. Because every election I was ever involved in, all the elections for lieutenant governor, for U.S. Senate, every time I was on the ballot, I was running against the political apparatus that the Clintons had so carefully put together over their 25 years in Arkansas. And I'm going to tell you something, it's going to be a formidable challenge. For those who think that this is going to be an easy race, I assure you that it will not be. It's going to be all that we want to get our arms around. All the more reason that we need to make sure that we are ready for that battle. I have the distinction of every time I ever ran for office, both the President and First Lady of the United States came back and campaigned for my opponent. That's a little intimidating, quite frankly. But I did something that only 3 Republicans in 150 years had done before me, and that's win a statewide office. The first one in 25 years when I was elected. And by the way, it was tough pickings. When I first got elected lieutenant governor, I got to the state capitol and my door was nailed shut from the inside. Now when I say nailed shut, I'm not making this up as some apocryphal story. It was literally nailed from the inside, nailed shut. And it stayed that way for my first 59 days as the elected lieutenant governor of the state. Finally, we got the door open after there was enough public pressure. And all the office furniture had been cleared out. It was empty. I'd get on that elevator at the Capitol, people would get off. I'd walk down the hall, people would turn and go the other way. I was re-elected as lieutenant governor the following year, having been elected originally in a special election. And then 3 years later, became governor when the governor was forced to resign because of felony convictions. The net result, I come into office as governor. My legislature is 89 Democrats in the House to 11 Republicans. And in the Senate, it's 31 Democrats to 4 Republicans. And by the way, some of those Republicans were kind of suspect. I'm not sure about them either. That was the environment in which I had to govern. But I'm going to tell you why it was a good thing for me. Because I learned how to govern with people who did not want me to be successful in doing it. And we spent 10.5 years never getting less than 90% of a legislative package passed, cutting taxes, passing strong pro-life legislation to protect the sanctity of human life, being able to reform our education system and take us from near dead last way up the ladder in test scores in every grade, and to be able to completely rebuild our road system, and again to do it with a legislature that never walked into that Capitol looking for a way to do me a favor. Folks, we need strong leadership. Leadership that understands how to govern. And one of the reasons that I stand before you tonight as a candidate for president is because I believe that I can offer that kind of leadership. We've got to be able to connect to people in a way that we failed to in the past. I hear people say, well, if Republicans can't get voters that normally don't vote Republican, how are we going to possibly win? I would agree with that. But can you name any Republican in America who got 49% of the African American vote in his or her state? I doubt you could, because I don't know of any others other than me. And the RNC apparently is not aware of them either. Now, these weren't people who became Republican all of a sudden. But you see, I have an understanding that people will vote in spite of a party if they believe that you're going to provide leadership. It's what I call the difference between vertical and horizontal politics, because a lot of politics is all horizontal. It's left, right, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, and the fights are always horizontal. I think America's looking for somebody to be a vertical leader, to take us up rather than down. And I'm convinced there are people through all kinds of political perspectives who just want to know we're going to get jobs back in this country, that people who go to work every day will be able to earn a decent paycheck, bring it home to their families, and provide for them. And that somebody will keep this country safe. Will actually make it a priority to get our military ready again. We have the lowest level of military preparedness since before the time of World War II. We're spending the lowest amount on our military right now than we have since before World War II. Surely we can do better. Surely we must do better, or this country's through. And people sometimes say, what's the best way to be safe and free and secure? Well, it's to have the kind of military nobody wants to fight. When you were in grade school, wasn't it true that if there was a bully in your school, and chances are there was a bully in your school, I hope it wasn't you, but if there was a bully in your school, my guess is that the bully never picked on the toughest kid in school. He always picked on somebody he knew he could beat up. The one person the bully never picked on was the person who would cause him to never be a bully again. I know it sounds counterintuitive to some people, but the best way to keep America out of a war is to have a military that nobody wants to fight. Have one that's so ready, so capable, so able, so awesome in its force that nobody would be foolish enough to want to pick a fight with. That's how strength and peace come to a nation. It's not by decimating the military, which is something we have done. I want to be your president. I need you here in Clark County to be with me and stand with me. Notice I didn't say to be behind me. I learned early on in my political life over 25 years ago when I say, will you be behind me? And people say, yeah. I found out what that meant. They were behind me, way behind me. I need you to be with me. We plan to go to every one of the 99 counties in Iowa just like I did in 2008. I assume nothing. I make no presumption that because people supported me before, they will again. I know we've got to earn it again. And I want to earn it. And I want to know that we can count on your support in the caucuses to give us the right kind of launch. I've often said that there's an old saying down south we love to say that if you see a turtle on a fence post, one thing you can be certain, he did not get there by himself. And I'm pretty sure I can tell you that if a person becomes president of the United States, he most certainly did not get there by himself. There were a lot of good people who were willing to help him. I'd like to see you good people help. I'm going to open it up and let you ask questions, and we'll start right here.
Do you think the federal government can bring our money situation under control? Is it going to take a generation to do it, or can it be done in less than 20 years?
I'm going to repeat the question, number one, so everyone can know what I'm answering. And number two, that way I get to repeat whatever question I want to answer, whether it's one that was actually asked or not. Fair enough? The question was, can we get our monetary situation, our budget, under control? Will it take a generation, or can it be done sooner? I don't think it'll be done overnight. It won't be done in a 1 or 2 or 3 year period, but we cannot cut our way out, and we cannot tax our way out of an $18 trillion debt. Not possible. The only way that we can get our economy back under control is to have a growth that would be significant. Now, I'm a proponent of the fair tax. I may be the only candidate who is absolutely committed to the fair tax, but here's why. I think it's the most brilliant approach to solving the economic crisis that has been put forth. It's a thoroughly studied, well-researched plan that would get rid of all the taxes we currently have on that which we produce. I mean, if you think about it, the current tax system is irrational. We value work because we need to work and need to have jobs. But what do we do if a person goes to work and has a job? We tax their income. In other words, we penalize them for working. That's not smart. We penalize people who save money. I'm going to just ask a question. How many of you, when you were kids, your parents urged you, if not required you, to save some money, right? What does the government do? It taxes the interest on our savings. So it punishes us for doing what our parents taught us to do. If you make a good investment, we tax the dividends and the capital gains. Now, if you make a bad one, we will subsidize you by letting you write it off your taxes. And then for one more grab into your pocket, we tax an inheritance, which for many Iowa farm families, like it is for Arkansas farm families, land that might have been in your family for 150 years, you'll have to sell half of it to pay the taxes if it's given to you as an inheritance. There's something not right about it. The government didn't do anything to earn half of your farm. That makes no sense. Look, folks, some things I learned just from being on this planet for a while. Our kids are grown. They're having kids of their own. That's why, as you heard a moment ago, 5 grandkids. And we do have photos, too. Let me tell you something we learned from raising 3 kids. If there is a behavior that you want more of, reward the behavior. If there is a behavior that you want less of, consequence the behavior. Now, in the old days, we used to say punish the behavior, but that's politically incorrect. So we're not supposed to punish anything anymore. I got punished when I was a kid. There wasn't any consequence to it. Old-fashioned punishment. Now, the point being that if the tax system punishes the productivity and the work that we want and rewards poor decisions, is it any small wonder that our economy is upside down? The fair tax says you'll pay your tax at the point at which you consume something. You pay 0 tax when you produce. None. You pay when you consume. Now the result is $11 trillion of U.S. capital parked offshore comes home to America. Think about all the foreign money that would also come. Think of what would happen to goose the economy if just that much capital came back to the U.S. And then what happens when we begin to manufacture things again, which we aren't doing largely because our tax system chases manufacturing right off our shore. We've lost 5 million manufacturing jobs since the year 2000. We've closed 60,000 manufacturing plants since the year 2000. Right now, the Republicans in Congress are determined, and they today handed the president a bill on trade. I don't really understand it. 74% of Americans are opposed. 74% of Republicans are opposed to it. We sent people to Congress this time to stop the executive overreach of President Obama on immigration and health care, and instead they go and give him more power at the executive level for trade. Maybe somebody can explain that to me. I think trade's a great thing when it's fair, because when it's fair it can be free trade, but we haven't had that. We've had an imbalanced trade where our trading partners are cheating. So one way to get our economy back is either enforce the trade deals or quit making them. Ideally, have trade deals, but enforce them and make them fair. Yes, we can get the economy back, but we can't do it by doing the things we've done, which is spending money we don't have and borrowing money we can't afford to pay back. You can't raise a family like that. You can't run a business like that, and nobody can run the government like that, but that's exactly how we've been running the government for the past 40 years. It's got to change. That's a long answer, but I could have gone longer. Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask about something that's not necessarily affecting Iowa or affecting the national government, but in the news on NPR as I was driving here, I was listening to them talk about Confederate flags, and I was wondering what your thoughts were of being Arkansas.
Well, I was asked about it over the weekend, and I was accused of punting. And my point was, you don't punt unless you have the ball. My whole point about when I was asked, what should South Carolina do? I said, I'll tell you what South Carolina do is what South Carolina chooses to do, but I'm running for President of the United States. I'm not running for Governor of Iowa. Now, the Governor of Iowa has taken a leadership position and said, we're going to bring that flag down on the state capitol grounds. She was flanked by the senators, the congressmen, and most of the legislative leaders of her state. That's where that issue should be decided. I don't know why it has become an issue for a presidential candidate, other than it's a baited question intended to sucker us in to get us to say something. But here's what I know for sure. Anything that is truly offensive to people, I don't want to personally display it. I don't have a Confederate flag. I don't display one. The closest thing may be an old Leonard Skinner album with a piece of it on there. But my point is, that's not an issue for me, nor has it ever been in my world. The lesson that I hope we get from all that's happening is in this discussion of racism, we learn the lesson of how to resolve true, horrible, heinous racism. The act that was inflicted upon those 9 people at the Emmanuel AME Church was an act of terrorism and an act of racism. There's no other explanation. It was just cold-blooded murder by an evil person. I saw something when those family members went to the courtroom. And when they looked that murderer in the eye and they said they forgave him, and when all the people are talking about we need to have some conversations about race, I'm thinking, no. We can have all the conversations in the world, but those are things that are going to happen external, and racism does not get resolved by having a conversation. It happens when our hearts are converted and we believe that God loves our brother and sister as much as he loves us. I want to tell you something, folks. The witness that those church members gave of their faith, they told us how to overcome racism. Because the fact is, if I love God, I can't hate you. I just can't. I don't hate anybody. And if I did hate somebody, then the love of God is not in me. It's impossible to say I have the love of God in me and the hate in my heart towards somebody else. If I believe that God loves me, I have to believe he loves you too. I can't believe he loves me more or he loves you less. The way to solve this issue is not for us to have a political battle, and it's not for us to have a rhetorical battle. It's for us to come to believe that all of us are accountable and responsible to a holy God in whose eyes all of us truly are equal. And we saw that witness by those folks in that church, and it was frankly overwhelmingly powerful for me to watch that. And I must confess that when I saw them, there was a part of me that said, I'm not sure that I have the depth of faith that some of them did. I pray to God that in the crucible moments of life I do, but it was hard for me to identify with the kind of level of grace, and I thought, what a great testimony that they gave all of us. Yes, ma'am. But you came anyway. Good.
I have a real concern, and I hate to have to reassure that I'm really concerned about it.
Yes.
I'm concerned about what's in our country and how it seems to me that it's very much out of control.
I'm sorry, the what?
Surveillance.
Surveillance.
Of people everywhere.
Yeah.
And how it seems to be overly surveillance and out of control in every kind of way. Messages that we look at are being looked at us by people that we don't even know. And I've learned this from experience, unfortunately, very bad experience. And maybe I can carry on this conversation just a little bit with you after.
Okay.
But because I personally am being hurt by it, literally being abused by it. And I don't know what to do. I try to go to all the right people, whether it be attorneys or church people or law enforcement. And I always get turned back. But I want to say one thing that actually last year, about this time last year, what is called a planetary list literally came up out of my ear. And it looked like movies, it's really certain that actually allows somebody to be able to eavesdrop on me, obviously without my permission. And it's not just eavesdropping, but they can actually communicate. It's like having a smart chip. Like I said, I don't want to take a lot of time here now, but I really want to further this concern of mine with you, because I really think this line
You were talking about surveillance. I thought you were talking about the NSA and the metadata collection of phone records. That's about the only thing I can speak to, because I'm not familiar with the specific things you're talking about. So the only thing in the broad way that I could certainly speak to with some maybe a level of understanding is I think that the government has to abide by the Constitution. Yes, we all want to be free. We all want to be safe and protected. We want to catch terrorists. But it's often told to us that catching a terrorist is like catching a needle in a haystack. You don't make it easier to get the needle if you make the haystack a lot bigger. What I feel like has to be is that if there's going to be any type of eavesdropping, there's got to be a warrant, probable cause, the basic fundamental constitutional requirements that goes before a second branch of government, or else it's a violation of our constitutional rights. It is not an undue burden. It is a burden, but it's a proper burden. That it's part of the messiness of having a constitution that is higher than our passions, our feelings, and on any given days, even our fears. We have to abide by that. We are a nation of laws. not just a nation of people that have their own way about wanting to do something. Yes, sir, Dale?
We did agree with gun control. Gun control, say what you're aiming.
Where I come from, it is. That's right, Dale. The question was, Dale said, is gun control making sure that you get what you aim at? I would say yes. That's always been the way I grew up, as many of you did, where firearms were a part of our culture, part of our life. I've been asked, are you a gun nut? And I've told people, no, I'm not a gun nut. I'm a liberty nut. I'm a nut for freedom. I'm a nut for protecting my family. And the fact is, if somebody breaks into my house at 2 o'clock in the morning and threatens the safety of my family, I'm still going to call 911. But I'm not going to call 911 so I can helplessly wait for 20 minutes while the law shows up. I'm calling them to tell them to come and pick up the carcass of the person that I'm going to take care of who broke into my house at 2 o'clock in the morning. When these kind of horrible things happen like in South Carolina, people want to always bring up, well, if we just didn't have guns. But I also know that in New Life Church in Colorado Springs a few years ago, when a crazed gunman went to a Sunday service and began shooting, it was the presence of a gun in the hands of an off-duty female deputy sheriff, 24 years old, who stopped the shooter, who would have probably killed hundreds of people, and stopped him because the firepower she had was equal to or greater than his. And I know that the worst mass shootings in America, all except one, have happened in gun-free zones. Because the shooter knows he's likely to be the only one who is going to be armed, and nobody's going to be able to stop him. Every time there is an active shooter, he's ultimately stopped when someone with a weapon equal to his is either able to confront him and the person ends his or her own life, or the police officers or the intervening party take the life of the shooter and saves the lives of other people. But I grew up, I got my first BB gun when I was 5 years old, a Model 25 Daisy. I got my first pellet gun at age 7, a pump pellet gun. I got a 22 at age 9, a single shot Springfield. 20 gauge shotgun when I was 10. But here's what I also learned. We learned that guns are not toys. You don't play with them. We learned the basic rules. You never point a gun at anybody, ever, for any reason, unless you have reason to protect yourself. Otherwise, you never, even in play, and every gun is loaded, even if it isn't, it's still loaded, and you treat it as if it's loaded. And you know that if you point a gun, you don't just point it and shoot it at your target. You know what's behind the target to know what might be the collateral behind what you're shooting at. You never shoot something you don't plan to eat. You don't shoot just to shoot. Wild game. You never kill anything you're not killing because it's part of feeding your family. Those are some fundamentals, and my guess is that most of you grew up the same way. I realize that's a culture that some people in parts of this country simply cannot get their arms around and understand. But I don't think that there's any way that we should yield over the Second Amendment or our culture because somebody else doesn't understand it who hasn't lived it. Good question, Dale. All right, who's next? Yes. The question is, how do we resolve the getting back the liberties that we've lost under Obamacare? Well, I think the court may end up ruling, unless they just make law out of thin air, which they are prone to do. I'm not sure how, in the Burwell versus King case, they can end up coming with any other conclusion other than a lot of Obamacare simply violated the law. We'll see very soon, well, probably within the next week. The problem with Obamacare was that its stated goal was to insure the uninsured. It's had the effect of perhaps insuring some people. But there are a lot of people that used to have insurance that they wanted, liked, and afforded, and now they have insurance they don't want, they don't need, they can't afford, and it does not do for them what they need at a much higher cost. I think the bigger question is, why don't we go to a healthcare system that truly meets the biggest challenges we face? A couple of examples. 80% of all the healthcare dollars we spend in America, we spend on chronic disease. We don't have a healthcare crisis, we have a health crisis in America. And the fact that people have severe chronic diseases is eating up the healthcare dollar. If we put a focus on curing diseases and preventing them rather than intervening after they're already spiraling out of control and at a catastrophic level, we transform the healthcare system. I'm going to give you an example. Only a few of you here probably are old enough to remember, as I do, back in the 50s when the vaccine for polio came out. And I remember in my little town in Hope, Arkansas, we lined up at the courthouse on a sunny afternoon. We were given the vaccine. Kids 2 years older than me had polio, had braces, had to go to the iron lung. We didn't. And the reason we didn't was because polio had been eradicated. Guess how much money we spent on polio last year in America? Nothing. We spent zero on polio because it doesn't exist in America against kids anymore. What if we applied the same tenacity that we once applied toward polio and toward sending a man to the moon and back, which was a crowning achievement for America, and I remember it very well, and to this day I have great admiration for a president, in this case President Kennedy, who said we're going to go to the moon, send a man and bring him back, and we did it. And we believed America could do anything. I still believe America could do anything. I still believe in this country. And I'd like to be the president who says that within 10 years we're going to find a cure for cancer, for heart disease, for diabetes, and Alzheimer's. And here's how that transforms not only the healthcare system, here's how that transforms the economy. We spend over $100 billion a year treating cancer, $313 billion a year treating heart disease, almost $500 billion dealing with diabetes and the effects of it. And by the year 2050, Alzheimer's alone will be a $1.1 trillion disease. Let's find a cure. Imagine what it does to the economy, not even to speak of what it does to you, your family, to not have to spend your money and lose so much of the quality of your life because you're having to deal with the devastating effects of disease. And putting the focus on preventing it rather than intervening, that's how we need to approach it. I'm going to take one final question, and then I'm not going to hold you people here all night. Yes?
What are you going to do about veterans?
Great question about the veterans. My frustration is that veterans made promises to America when they put the uniform on. And America made promise to the veterans. And there was a transaction. The veterans said, we'll go serve, we'll dodge bullets and bombs. And the country said, if you do that, you'll have health care, we'll provide educational benefits. We made a whole list of promises. The veterans kept their end of the bargain, but the country has not. Just today I learned that since the revelation of how bad things have gotten, with the fact that we've seen so many people have to wait for care, you'd think it would get better. It's actually 50% worse now than it was 2 years ago. Here's the solution. Get rid of the VA. Just put it out of its misery, and most importantly, put it out of the veterans' misery. Give every veteran a health care card that entitles them to get the medical care that they need, the closest access of that good health care that is convenient for them rather than what's convenient for the government to deliver it. You say that might be expensive. It might be. And if we have to take down every monument in Washington, D.C., cut it up into pieces and sell them for souvenirs to pay for it, so be it. But the first fruits of the U.S. Treasury ought to be for the veterans who have put their lives on the line for us and who personally bought our freedom. Every breath of free air we breathe is because veterans provided it for us. And veterans ought to be first in line. It's not an entitlement. I hate it when somebody uses that word. It makes it sound like we're giving veterans welfare. We're only giving them what we promised them. And it's the same reason, by the way, that I kind of out there by myself to say this notion that we're going to cut the benefits of Social Security and Medicare and that we're going to raise the age at which you receive it. Folks, this is nonsense. This is not money that the government is giving you out of their kindness. This is money they took from you over the course of your lifetime working. Did any of you have a choice about paying in Medicare or Social Security? You did not. They took it out of your check before you ever saw it, and they told you, if we take this out, here's what's going to be waiting on you when you're 65. Now they want to say, well, it may be 75. And by the way, it's not going to be there as much. Oh, and if you make more money than we think you should have made because you were actually a pretty good steward of your resources, then we may take it all away. Well, folks, the government has lied to us and stolen from us enough. And I think at some point we have to say, no more. If the government screwed up about the way that they structured the program, then let the consequences first be borne by the people who screwed up, not by the people who have paid in for 51 years from the time they were 14 and got their first job until the time they were 65, and should have some expectation that the government is going to give them back the money that they put in during 51 years of having it confiscated out of their pockets and paychecks. So I believe full well the veterans and people who have put into this country shouldn't be the ones who are made the scapegoats. And I've said this, folks, very clearly. If the Congress of the United States is determined to cut somebody's pension, let them start with their own pension and cut it before they want to take some widow who's 80 years old and tell her that her checks have decided no longer to be sent to her. That's where the pension cuts need to go. Well, I'm not going to keep you any longer. I want to thank you very much. And folks, we hope that here in Clark County we'll have your support and that you tell your friends, your relatives, people you work with, your neighbors, and ask them to help you. Help me. And if you find a neighbor or a friend that's going to vote for somebody else, tell them the caucuses have been canceled, just like the straw poll. If you find somebody who's going to vote for me, make sure they show up on caucus night. That's how this is supposed to work. God bless you, folks. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. And by the way, may I say that the best behaved in the whole room were all these children and babies who never uttered a peep. I think they deserve a hand for being such
Oh gosh, no, but I thought it was going to be quite a like ask me some questions. I don't know.
You whacked his little head and didn't cry.
Well, honestly, he sits perfect, but then the one time he jolted and so I'm like, oh my gosh, like, and it was loud. No problem. And he didn't care. He didn't care at all. I want to stay late first. I think I'm going to stay in. I'm going to stay in.
Yeah, you may stay
I
for a
may
while.
still. Okay, that's